early modern European philosophy of the 17th, 18th centuries. What do we mean by the term modern philosophy? You know, the age of reason and the age of enlightenment. These are two major phenomena that shaped the spirit of epoch. The development of the worldview paradigm of the modern age here, which is traditionally called the age of reason, is characterized by the manifestation and strengthening of a set of some new trends. First of all, I'd like to make a brief account of these trends. The first one is the so-called secular rationalist trend. Secular rationalist trend, the emergence of humanism, so also the development of the Reformation movement, secularization, and the development of rationalist culture stimulated by the progress in various fields of positive science and knowledge. Another one was the so-called anthropocentric trend, correlated with the recognition of human agency. That was the process of a gradual liberation of a person from the power of authorities and traditions, the achievement of the state of spiritual maturity. I consider how German philosopher Immanuel Kant answered the question, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use understanding without guidance from another. So this immaturity is self-imposed one. Its cause lies not in lack of understanding, but in lack of resolve and courage to use it without guidance from another. Dare to know, that was the motto of the epoch. Have courage to use your own understanding. That is the motto of enlightenment. So, that is a clear manifestation of the recognition of human agency. And the third very essential trend, which is really characteristic of this epoch, the so-called technological activist trend, which displays itself in promoting the activity of techne, both on scientific knowledge and technical inventions. Just this activity has turned out to be a form of the implementation of the transformative attitude to reality, and it provided the basis for the progressive development of technogenic civilization and the modernization of society. And many philosophers, in fact, embraced the establishment of the status of natural sciences, and they appreciated their cognitive investment to the progress of civilization. Just recall Francis Bacon's motto, knowledge is power. Yeah? Positive scientific knowledge is considered to be the power of progressive innovation and enhancement of social life. And philosophy intends to elaborate some new traditional, some new rational approaches on the basic problems of metaphysics and theory of knowledge. But anyway, I'd like to cite Lawrence Cahun. Modern philosophy, beginning in the 16th, 17th centuries, marked a major departure from medieval thought. Throughout the age of reason in the 17th century, scientific change forced philosophers to reconceive the world and how we know it. And the new science overturned the Aristotelian and Ptolemaic science that had been woven together with Christianity, and the period led to the 18th century, the Enlightenment, when science, education, and political freedom were believed to be the keys to remaking society. So you see, modern philosophy had to take into account the scientific revolution, which was associated with the development of experimental and mathematical natural sciences. That was the revolution which was initiated due to the discoveries of Copernicus, Kepler, Tycho de Broglie, Galileo, Newton. Achievements of science turned out to be the resources of technical activities aimed at the transformation of nature, of social environment. They provided the basis for the building of civilization, and philosophy had to realize the meaning and the scale of the ongoing changes and introduce some new view of the world, philosophy had to develop the concept of a new position of man in his relation to nature, society, himself, or God, a position as a free subject of active cognitive and practical activity aimed at mastering nature with the help of knowledge and technology, general education, social renewal. And, philosophy in the modern age seeks to free itself from the dictates of the medieval scholastic tradition, and it distances itself from all types of rational worldview. Nevertheless, of course, some of the metaphysical philosophical doctrines were still under the influence of religious tradition, but that was a rationalized religious tradition adapted for the purposes of philosophical inquiry. Philosophy focuses primarily on clarifying the ways of rational comprehension of reality, which to a large extent should have been consistent with knowledge instantiated in positive sciences. And the philosopher works at the issue of identifying the conditions for the possibility of getting knowledge through the natural light of reason. And among these problems, such problems as the problem of the reliable sources and certain foundations of knowledge, and the problem of efficient methods of philosophical and scientific research that would enable to obtain reliable and useful truths. The English empiricist Francis Bacon and French rationalist René Descartes acknowledged the value of the problem of method. They would agree on the task of philosophy, which was seen as to develop methodological framework, just to provide methodological foundations for science and to integrate the worldview on the basis of consistent metaphysical principles and universal concepts. In the field of epistemology, for instance, philosophers work at the strategies that would enable to identify and expose mainly natural sources of knowledge. Natural source of knowledge that would provide some certainty, certain foundations for our claims to know the world and ourselves. And modern philosophers turn to the problem of the reflectively distinct ways and universal conditions of cognitive activity, and they were focused on the study of the role of rational reflection or empirical experience. Anyway, there was made a good start of philosophical competition, search for the proper and efficient method of scientific and metaphysical research, and the most prominent philosophers of that early modern period are the rationalists such as René Descartes, Benedictus Spinoza, George Wilhelm Leibniz, and the empiricists, mainly English empiricists, Francis Bacon, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, George Berkeley, and of course David Hume. So there was a competition between these two fundamental trends in epistemology and even in metaphysics, because epistemological theories were in correlation with the metaphysical insights of the philosophers of the modern age. Rationalism and empiricism, these were two major competing and opposing trends. Rationalism is the view that reason, as opposed to sense experience, divine revelation, or reliance on institutional authority, plays a dominant role in our attempt to gain knowledge. And empiricism stresses the fundamental role of experience. And as a doctrine in epistemology, it holds that all knowledge is ultimately based on experience. Later on, Immanuel Kant tried to reconcile these positions, and he put forward the view which is known as transcendental idealism. And he tried to take into account the contribution of our sense experience, as well as the formative role of our a priori structures associated with some forms of intuition and categories understanding. Among the prominent rationalists of the Age of Reason was René Descartes. He was a real founder of the modern philosophy. René Descartes intended to formulate methodology that applies to all the sciences. And René Descartes claimed that the sciences are nothing but human wisdom, which always remains one and the same, however much its objects may differ. That is a rather universalistic and democratic approach, I would say. The sciences are so interconnected and interdependent that it is easier to learn them together than separately. What someone seeking truth in the sciences must first do is to consider how to increase his natural light of reason, the cognitive abilities he is naturally endowed with. René Descartes elaborated the conception of philosophical method and philosophical truth. The problem of method, as I already told you, was of really great importance to the philosophers of the modern age. How to conduct our reason when we seek truth in philosophy or in the sciences. Now, Descartes believed in the universal power of reason, in the universal cognitive capacities of human beings, and he offered a set of rules that he said he found sufficient in search for the truth, rules that would enable us to conduct our reason and to make our cognitive behavior truth conducive. These are 4 rules of method, and Descartes tried to follow these rules while building up his own theory of knowledge. Never accept anything as true which you didn't know evidently to be true, including nothing in your judgments except that has presented itself so clearly and distinctly to your mind that you have no reason to doubt it. So that means that, first of all, we should begin with the propositions that are so evident that there is no any ground for doubting them. The second rule, divide the difficulties you are examining into as many parts as possible. The third one, conduct your thoughts in an orderly way, beginning with the simplest objects and ascending gradually to the most complex. And finally, make enumeration so complete and review so comprehensive that you were sure you hadn't left anything out. So the first rule is intended to fix some a priori axiomatic propositions that would serve as the foundations for the subsequent inferences through which we generate knowledge. The second rule, actually, which requires just to divide the difficulties we are examining into as many parts as possible. This is the rule of analysis. Anyway, we apply this rule while just trying to make mathematical calculations. Then we have to conduct our thoughts in an ordinary way. That is the rule of synthesis. We should begin with the simplest objects and then ascend gradually to the most complex. And finally, the fourth rule is the rule of enumeration, the rule of control. We should control it and check it out. Whether we have accomplished all the possible inferences, or maybe we have missed some links in the inferential relations between beliefs or propositions. So these are universal rules to conduct our reason, and Descartes considered those rules to be really useful. And he introduced his own method. Just take a look at the first rule. It requires us just to never accept anything as true which we didn't know evidently to be true. So the first method which should be applied in order to identify the propositions that resist any doubt is the method of doubt. Cartesian method, the method of doubt, but that is a kind of methodological doubt. You see, this method was to shut off everything about which there could be even a suspicion of doubt, including the unreliable senses, including in our intuitive awareness of the fact that we are persons with a normal physical constitution, that we have bodies, for instance, and of course including illusions or dreams. The main goal is to arrive at the point, to the point at which we can identify a single indubitable principle. And Descartes was the first to raise the question of how we can know things with certainty, how we can claim to know with certainty anything about the world around us. And he's the author of a set of works, and among these works, a philosophical treatise which is entitled Meditations on the First Philosophy. And in this work, Descartes claims that philosophical search for the certain grounds of knowledge must begin with ridding ourselves of all past beliefs, specifically of those assumptions that can be doubted on some reasonable grounds. So Descartes assumed that if a belief survives a thorough attempt to doubt it, it will qualify as indubitable and provide a proper foundation for reconstructing our system of beliefs. That is a typical foundationalist view. Some beliefs are basic, indubitable, they are of highest certainty, and the justification of other beliefs depends on those basic beliefs due to the inferential relations with those beliefs. So there is a proposition, Descartes claims, that resists all attempts to doubt it, on which one can build a revised system of beliefs. And Descartes identified this proposition as the following one: I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. The initial certainty is the existence of the self as a thinking substance. And that is what is presented as the result of his famous cogito argument. Cogito argument. First, I'm going to expose you the overall structure of this argument, and then I'm proceed with the explanations of the succession of arguments that would result in the establishment of the truth that is really resistant and immune to any doubt. So the cogito argument, in its simplest form, can be explicated as follows: I have doubt of the reality of the external world and of my having a body and being a part of that world. If I have doubt of anything, then I think of it. Because to doubt something is to think of that thing which you subject to doubt. So if I have doubt of anything, then I think of it. To think, it is necessary to exist, because thinking is just the activity of an agent. Therefore, there must be an agent, one who exercises this ability of doubting, of thinking, making deliberations. So to think, it is necessary to exist. I think, I have doubt, therefore I exist. That is the simplest and paradigmatic form of one of the most influential and classical arguments in the history of philosophy. So, once again, in fact, there is a set of arguments introduced by René Descartes in his search for the certain foundations of knowledge, in his search for the ultimate certainty of the propositions that would provide the basis for the knowledge of ourselves and of the world. And René Descartes argued that we cannot know something if we are unable to distinguish the case where it is true from the case where, though false, it seems to be true. So that is the application of the method of doubt. If we are to establish anything in the sciences, in philosophy, that is stable and likely to last, we must demolish all our ordinary opinions. We should critically scrutinize all our assumptions. And we should test our beliefs, even those beliefs which we take for granted and which we think to be true without doubting them. But now the time has come just to examine those beliefs. So, and the first step in his search for the ultimate certainty is the step which leads to the critical relation of the deliverances of our senses. Our senses can deceive us, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. So the meditator, major figure in his work Meditations on the First Philosophy, considers common cases of sense deception as a ground of doubt. Yet he dismisses them because they support doubts only about small and distinct objects, not the more general doubt about all material objects. So, yet there's a more serious skeptical argument, the so-called dream argument. Dream argument. This argument goes as follows. In our dreams, we can represent things to ourselves just as convincingly as our senses now do, but which bear no relation to reality. Each night, René Descartes writes, when we fall asleep, we dream. In those dreams, we have experiences just as vivid as our most vivid waking experiences. Or at least if there is a difference between our dreams and our most vivid waking experiences, it is not discernible during the dream. Only afterward, when we wake up, do we realize that we were dreaming. So it is possible for all we know that we are dreaming now, no matter how convincing our present experience seems to be. That is a global dream. So we are in a state of dream, and we are not aware of the factors that would enable us to discriminate between dream and our alternative state of mind, which relates us to reality. But at this stage of exploration, Descartes objects to himself. Dreams are like paintings, he claims. A painter can rearrange scenes, but ultimately depicts things derived from real things, if only real colors. So by similar reasoning, even if familiar things, our eyes, head, hands, and so on, are imaginary, they must depend on some simpler and more universal things that are real. But what things? What kind of things can be known to be real with certainty? And on further reflection, the meditator realizes that even simple things can be subjected to doubt. Even simple things which we take for granted as being real can be doubted. He claims that, for instance, omnipotent God could make even our conception of mathematics false. But the most crucial among the arguments is the argument which now is called the evil demon argument. The evil demon argument. It goes as follows. If we suppose there is no God, then there is even greater likelihood of being deceived, since our imperfect senses wouldn't have been created by a perfect being. Let us suppose that not God, but some evil demon has committed itself to deceiving us so that everything we think we know is false. By doubting everything, we can at least be sure not to be misled into falsehood by this demon. And at this stage, Descartes claims that I will suppose, therefore, that not God, who is supremely good and the source of truth, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning has employed all his energies in order to deceive me. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely the delusions of dreams which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. This is the evil demon and his activities. So as if we simply live in a simulative reality, as if we are determined by the matrix, as if the matrix has us. Yeah? And Descartes thinks that there is not one of my former beliefs about which a doubt may not properly be raised. That's the case for radical skepticism. And for the sake of the inquirer, we can even suppose that we have no senses and no body. That is our illusion. But does it now follow that if I have no senses and no body, I too do not exist? And Descartes' answer is no. If I convince myself of something, then I certainly existed. But there is a deceiver, supreme power, evil, demon, and cunning, who is deliberate and constantly deceiving me. And in that case, I too undoubtedly exist. If he is deceiving me. And let him deceive me as much as he can, he will never bring it about that I am nothing so long as I think that I am something. So, after considering everything very thoroughly, I must finally conclude that this proposition, I exist, is necessarily true whenever it is put forward by me or conceived in my mind. So, that is a cogito argument, cogito ergo sum. So, Descartes claims to find the proposition that resists all attempts to doubt it. The initial certainty is the existence of the self. I'm aware of my existence insofar I think. So that is the energy of thinking which displays my reality. And that is the Latin version, cogito ergo sum, of an inference that appears in the discourse in French, je pense, donc je suis. I think, therefore I exist. You know, there were lots of criticisms of this argument. And Descartes' contemporaries argued that in order even to get as far as realizing his own existence, the meditator has to have a considerable amount of knowledge. For example, of what is meant by the very terms thought or existence. In reply, Descartes considered and indeed insisted that such prior conceptual knowledge was indeed required, and the cogito was primary only in the sense that it is the first existential truth which the meditator arrives at. But this reply in turn raises difficulties, and one of these difficulties may be termed the problem of Cartesian privacy. Its full implications have only become apparent in the 20th century, chiefly as a result of the work of Ludwig Wittgenstein, a famous Austrian and English philosopher. In his famous private language argument, Ludwig Wittgenstein showed that for a term in any language to have meaning, there must be public criteria determining its correct application. So there is no place for any private language. Yet this result, if we apply it to the Cartesian meditator, seems to undermine the entire Cartesian project. Descartes' project requires the meditator to doubt the existence of everything and everyone apart from himself. Just to doubt the existence of everyone apart from himself and of everything which falls out of his or her mind, in order to reach a subjective awareness of his or her own existence. And Wittgensteinian argument shows that our grasp of concepts is inescapably public, socially mediated. And John Cottingham, a modern scholar, reasonably knows, yet if the very understanding of terms like thought and existence presupposes a public realm of criteria determining the application, there is something inherently unstable about the private perspective of the Cartesian quest for knowledge. So that means that this private perspective, in which the existence of our own self is the only thing which is evident and which can be known with certainty, itself can be doubted. Now let's examine Descartes' strategy of reconstituting objective world. So Descartes then worked to reconstitute the world again according to his own strict rules. So Descartes argued that among the contents of our consciousness, of which we're aware, was the idea of God. And the mere fact that we have an idea of God leads to a proof of his existence. So Descartes sets out a causal argument for the existence of God. And now this argument, we analyze this argument and we do understand that it is based on the scholastic causal principle. According to this principle, the cause must be greater or at least as great as the effect, never the reverse. In the extended explication of this causal principle, it follows that it stands to reason that a cause must be at least as great as its effect, otherwise how could it produce the effect? It follows that we can get something from nothing, or the perfect from the imperfect. That's the application. So Descartes argues that since he has a clear and distinct idea of perfect infinite being, the idea of God, such an idea with perfect and infinite content could only be produced by a cause with perfect and infinite reality. So the fact is that I am imperfect being. I cannot be the author of the idea of God. But I do have an idea of God in my mind. That is an idea of a most perfect being. God is best understood as supremely perfect and infinite being, and this implies that he must have all perfections and only perfections. This account of being in terms of perfections was criticized by Immanuel Kant, who proved the proposition that being is not a real predicate. I told you about that when we addressed famous Anselm of Canterbury ontological argument. So, an imperfect being can be the author of the idea which contains and encompasses all the possible perfections and even more. As an imperfect being, I couldn't have been the only generator or producer of the idea of a most perfect being. For it is manifest to the natural light of reason that there must be as much reality, perfection in the cause as in the effect. And applying this principle to ideas, it manifests that there must be as much formal reality in the cause of an idea as there is objective reality in the idea itself. So the more reality, perfection represented by an idea, the greater the reality that produced it. My idea of God represents the highest degree of reality, and I'm aware of this idea. It is actually present in my mind. So its cause, therefore, must be real in the highest degree. It must be God himself. So the only possible explanation for the meditators possessing an idea of God is that God does exist. In creating me, God must have placed this idea within me to be, as it were, the mark of the craftsman stamped on the work. So I have an idea of God, therefore God exists. That was his argument. In fact, there were some more arguments for the existence of God, and he claimed that the existence of God also can be proved as a matter of analytic truth, and he strongly relied on the assumption that existence of being can be treated as a real predicate, as a kind of perfection, and can be analytically read out of the very concept of God, and that view, as I've already told you, was severely subjected to the criticism by Immanuel Kant. But I'd like to stress the point that the idea of God plays a major methodological role in the validation of reason and in setting up a foundation for our knowledge of the external world. Descartes' conclusions have concerned only himself and the contents of his own consciousness. That is a kind of private perspective, the private perspective of the Cartesian quest for knowledge. It is limited anyway. Artificial intelligence lives on its own. Yeah? I guess that the development of artificial intelligence to a large extent is the far-going consequences of René Descartes' methodology. Now we can use this reference to artificial intelligence and pose the problems about the simulative reality, whether we can ascribe mind to machines and how mind is related to body, whether it is somehow determined by the functional syncretic structures or not. And no, René Descartes was the first to lay foundations for the philosophical research in this sphere. He investigated such problems as the mind-body relation and the very idea of mind, and whether we are aware of the content of our mind and what is that feature which makes us conscious. So, René Descartes' conclusions have concerned only himself, and the very method of doubt has forced Descartes' meditator into the confines of what is typically called the first-person case. Yet Descartes wishes to show that there is an objective world that exists independently of his thoughts and perceptions. The world that might at any moment be other than it appears to him to be. But the peculiarity of the first-person case is that from the first-person point of view, the private perspective, the distinction between being and seeming doesn't arise. My conscious mental states are as they seem to me, and they seem to me as they are. So there's no place for any mistake, for any distinction between being and seeming. And knowledge of the first person fails to reach out beyond subjectivity to the concept of an objective order that is independent of his thoughts and perceptions. And therefore Descartes needed to establish the existence of at least one being independent of himself and in relation to which he could situate himself as part of an objective world. In fact, we have a kind of overwhelming impression of the existence of a concrete world around us. That's a matter of fact. If we have this overwhelming impression of the existence of a concrete world around us, as we do, then an omniscient and omnibenevolent God would ensure that such a world does in fact exist for us. So Descartes' argument is as follows. The things in the external world are material because God wouldn't deceive me as to the ideas that are being transmitted, and He has given me the propensity to believe that such ideas are caused by material things. And because of this belief that God is benevolent and doesn't desire to deceive him, the meditator can therefore have some faith in the account of reality his senses provide. So, you see, that is how the objective world is reconstituted. God ensures that such material world does in fact exist for us, because God is benevolent and it doesn't desire to deceive me. God wouldn't deceive me as to the ideas that are being transmitted and has given me the propensity to believe that such ideas are caused by material things. That is why I can at least believe in the fact that there are some things outside my mind, because I have the propensity to form the ideas, to be aware of ideas that, as I think, are caused by material things. Some ideas, of course, are innate, others are formed or caused by the material things. And if there is such a propensity, God would ensure that this propensity is not contingent one. And that means that I'm justified in believing in the reality of the objective world. Yet René Descartes dismissed the senses and perception as unreliable and come to the conclusion that reason and deduction is the only reliable method of attaining knowledge, which is the essence of rationalism. He even claimed that in order to prove that bodies, physical bodies, are real, and in order to explain the ontological structure of physical bodies, we should rely on our reason, because bodies are not conceived through the senses, but through the process of purely intellectual conception. And René Descartes uses the example of a piece of wax. So let's examine a particular body, a piece of wax, to see what we know distinctly in that object. We can describe the properties of this piece of wax: size, shape, color, hardness, temperature, taste, fragrance. Then we can take wax near far and know the changes it undergoes in these changed circumstances. All its sensible properties change, but the wax remains numerically the same in spite of its qualitative changes, and no one doubts this. So the conclusion is that wax is not to be identified with any of its changing sensible properties. The wax is nothing but an extended something capable of changing its shape, capable of changing in general. But that is our intellectual conception. The only property essential to any physical body is that to be extended. So, and this property is grasped by the means of our intellect, not due to the activity of our senses. So, that is a typical thought experiment. And this experiment is particularly interesting because one can find in it the anticipation and insinuation of the foundations of René Descartes' physics. So I tell you that René Descartes was a typical rationalist. What are the main claims of classical rationalism? They are as follows. First, some propositions are knowable by us by intuition alone, something which is given to us as with certainty. And other propositions are knowable by being deduced from these intuited certain propositions. René Descartes claimed that there is a clear and distinct idea which presents itself to our mind. So in this case we are infallible, and lots of rationalists take intuition to be infallible. They claim that whatever we intuit must be true. So in René Descartes terms, what presents itself clearly and distinctly to our mind is true, because there are no any ground for doubt. But other rationalists allow for the possibility of false intuited propositions. Some rationalists claim that only mathematics can be knowable by intuition and deduction, and other rationalists claim also that ethical truth can also be intuited. For instance, Leibniz claimed that ethical truth are of a priori scale, and some more radical rationalists maintain that a whole range of metaphysical claims are the elements of the a priori system of knowledge, something which is known on the basis of intuition and deduction. Also, another concept which is typically used by rationalists is that of innate knowledge. We have knowledge of some truths as part of our innate rational nature experiences might trigger a process by which we bring this knowledge to consciousness. But the experiences don't provide us with the knowledge itself. So these innate truths maybe they originate due to some potential dispositions, to form certain, to inform our mind with these truths, which are resistant to any doubt, and the truth that are of a priori status. So knowledge has in some way been with us all along, a kind of innate knowledge. And some rationalists claim that we gained this innate knowledge in early existence, some that God provided us with it at creation, others that it is part of our nature, through natural selection. Anyway, that is a kind of dispositional knowledge. And on a concrete occasion, we can form some ideas, and those ideas, they constitute the proto-dexatic elements of innate knowledge. Innate concepts. Some concepts, as opposed to actual knowledge, the concepts that are building blocks of propositions, some concepts we employ are part of our innate rational nature. And some rationalists would argue, however, that innate concepts are entailed by innate knowledge, because a particular instance of knowledge can only be innate if the concepts that are contained in the proposition are also innate. The knowledge we gain by intuition and deduction, as well as the ideas and instances of knowledge that are innate to us, are indispensable and couldn't have been gained through sense experience. So reason is superior to experience as a source of knowledge. That's the major tenet of rationalism. But epistemological inquiries do not exhaust the program of rationalist research. In the field of metaphysics, or theory of being, early modern philosophy was engaged in critical consideration of the major ideas that constitute the core of the fundamental views of reality. Now let's turn to these metaphysical problems in modern European philosophy. So, what are the views that are essential to our understanding of the building blocks of reality? The ideas that are of essential value to the metaphysical account of things. These are the ideas of God, of human being, and of nature and world as a whole. So modern philosophy needs to work on strategies of making certain of what is real, to expose the structure of reality by applying methods of critical analysis and rational representation of the major elements and constituents of that which is real. And that is a typical feature of the Age of Reason, because in the Age of Reason there was lots of disciplines that made essential contribution to the development of the so-called rationalist view of the world. And philosophy was one of the major disciplines. Philosophy's function was just to reflect on the metaphysical grounds of science, because philosophy itself, it is aimed at critically at critical analysis of the implicit assumptions, axiomatic principles, categories, and conceptual preconditions of any scientific objectification and theoretical representation of the world. So, once again, let's take a look at René Descartes and metaphysical implications of his theory. René Descartes' metaphysical theory gave expression to a dualist view of reality. The overall reality is split into two substantially distinct kinds of things: res cogito and res extensa. First of all, I'm aware of myself as a thing which is capable of thinking, and thinking is the attribute which is really constitutive of the essence of myself. So I'm aware of my soul. I'm aware of myself as res cogito. And beside that, René Descartes managed to prove the fact that there is something out there beyond our mind, something which is external to our mind, an objective world. So there is a realm of things that can be categorized as res extensa. So human body is an extended, unthinking substance. Human mind is a thinking, unextended substance, and a human being is a combination of the two. They somehow joined at the conception and separated at death. So the mind or soul is a thinking thing. That is the first thing which can be known with certainty. I know of myself as a thinking thing. Thinking encompasses, according to René Descartes, all mental activities, including awareness, feeling, remembering, imagining, desiring, deciding, as well as questioning, analyzing, and reasoning. And matter, the stuff of which physical bodies are made, is characterized by lots of specific properties such as size, shape, weight. Material things can be in motion or at rest, but in fact they do not think. At least thinking is not the essential characteristic, is not the attribute of those substances that are extended substances. They're made of just mindless stuff. So René Descartes was the proponent of mind-body dualism. The human body is a kind of machine that follows the mechanical laws of physics, and it is studied by physical scientists. The mind or consciousness was quite a separate entity, not subject to the laws of physics. The mind is only able to influence the body and deal with the outside world by a kind of mysterious two-way interaction. So that is the mind dualism, and that also gave rise to the so-called mind-body problem. And the first instance of this mind-body problem in philosophy can be seen in René Descartes' dualistic interactionism. René Descartes admitted that there is some sort of dualistic interactionism. That means that res extensa or physical entities can get into causal interaction with res cogito, with minds or souls. Descartes even identified the pineal gland in the brain as the place where this interaction occurs. And René Descartes claimed that, first of all, we are somehow stimulated by the external realities. When this stimulus reaches the pineal gland in the brain, they force the pineal gland to quiver in an exquisitely delicate manner, which transmits signals to the mind. But, of course, this explanation and the overall dualistic interactions tradition can be subjected to doubt, because, in fact, Descartes didn't explain how the physical vibrations of the pineal gland could cause non-physical experiences in the mind. And there's also the reverse question that can be posed. How mental events can cause physical events? That's the question. And that is one of the major problems in the philosophy of mind. If mental entities and events have no physical substance or properties and do not exist in space, how can they causally affect physical objects? How can they even make contact with them? Implicitly, we should recognize the principle of the causal closure of physical world. And it seems that this principle doesn't allow any interference on the part of mental entities. And that is also incompatible with the idea of physical entropy. Nevertheless, still we claim that there is something real. that our mind can be identified as the element of the class of those things that are real, whether it is of substantial status or not, that is the question. In the beginning of the 20th century, an American philosopher, Gilbert Ryle, doubted this approach, the approach which treats minds or souls as a kind of substances. He claimed that we have no grounds for substantiating and objectifying our mental properties. There is no such thing as life, but in fact, being alive is the property of a living organism. And there is no such thing as consciousness or conscious mind, as in fact this reality is not of a substantial kind. It is simply a property of a living organism. And the problem is how to explain this property. So-called mental properties should be explained in their relation to physical properties and states. So that is one of the central problems in the contemporary philosophy of mind. Now let's turn to an alternative view, substance monism, the view which is alternative to the dualistic view proposed by René Descartes. And among the prominent philosophers who introduced this view was Baruch or Benedictus Spinoza, Dutch Jewish philosopher. Spinoza's family were Portuguese Judaizing Maranhas, forced converts to Christianity living secretly as Jews. And his father had emigrated to Amsterdam to avoid persecution, where he built up a successful merchant business. As Spinoza's mother died when he was 6 and his father when he was 22. So Spinoza continued for a time as a respected member of his community. He ran the family business with his brother, but then a crisis arose, and actually he was the follower of René Descartes. A crisis arose when he wouldn't renounce the heterodox opinions he had been heard to voice, and after unsuccessful efforts by his silence, he was cursed and excommunicated from the Jewish community. But no, Spinoza was self-made philosopher, in fact. Spinoza only published 2 books in his lifetime: The Principles of Descartes' Philosophy and the Tractatus Theologica Politicus. But Spinoza's great work, The Ethics, was published after his death, and this work, The Ethics, is presented as a deductive system in the manner of Euclid. That was the influence of the scientific spirit on philosophy. His fundamental work, Ethics, contains 5 parts: concerning God, on the nature and origin of the mind, concerning the origin and nature of the emotions of human bondage, or the strength of the emotions, of the power of the intellect, or of human freedom. And each of its 5 parts opens with a set of definitions and axioms, and is followed by a series of theorems proved upon the basis of what precedes them. Spinoza's conception of the world was quite different from that of René Descartes. Spinoza built up a rather interesting and original self-contained metaphysical system, and in his theory he rejected René Descartes' mind-body dualism. He established so-called substantial monism. According to this theory, mind, so something which instantiates the activity of thinking, and body, something which is characterized by material extension, were just two different aspects or attributes of a single underlying substance. And this substance was called nature. And he also equated it with God. God, which has infinitely many attributes. And of these attributes, only two are knowable by us and accessible to our understanding: the attribute of thinking and the attribute of material extension. So, and that is a typical view which is now labeled as substantial monism, or substance monism. Substance monism is the complex thesis that there is only one substance in the universe. This substance is to be identified with God or nature, so they were pantheistic tendencies in Spinoza's theory. Substance is defined as what is in itself and is conceived through itself. That is the definition of substance. By substance, I understand, Spinoza writes, what is in itself and is conceived through itself. That is, that whose concept doesn't require the concept of another thing from which it must be formed. Substance as a being has infinitely many attributes, and of these attributes only extension and thought are those attributes that we can understand, because we are also instantiate these finite modes of these attributes of substance. We've got body and also soul or mind. By attribute, Spinoza writes, I understand what the intellect perceives of a substance as constituting its essence. By God, I understand a being absolutely infinite, a substance consisting of an infinity of attributes, of which each one expresses an eternal and infinite essence. And all of reality was really just one substance, and all apparently different objects were merely facets or aspects or modes of that underlying substance. By mode, Spinoza writes, I understand the affections of a substance, or that which is in another thing through which it is also conceived. So, substance, infinitely many attributes, and modes. So, Spinoza, in contrast to René Descartes, consistently maintains that there is only one substance, God or nature, and thought and extension are among its attributes, and within each attribute the modes of God are of two kinds: infinite modes, which are pervasive features of each attribute, such as the laws of nature. These are infinite modes, and finite modes, which are local and limited modifications of substance. For instance, physical objects are finite modes of one and the same substance under the attribute of extension. Our ideas in our mind are finite modes of the same substance, which manifests itself through the attributes of thinking. And there is an infinite sequence of finite modes. And let's consider how Spinoza proves that there is only one substance. In the universe, there cannot be two or more substances of the same nature or attribute. Spinoza poses the question about that which can be used as the basis for the distinction between substances, how can we possibly distinguish two substances in their reality? It couldn't be their affections or modes, because they must be different in order to have different affections. Just as two men couldn't be distinguished by the fact that one was angry and the other not. Well, this possibility rests upon their being different men. Presupposes, yeah, the ontological and numerical difference. However, on the only alternative, that they are distinguished by their natures or attributes, there wouldn't be instances of what is denied. Since an attribute is simply a way of conceiving the essence or nature of a substance, any shared attribute implies a shared essence, which in turn implies the same set of attributes as ways of conceiving it. And insofar substance is defined as the reality which is infinitely many and all possible attributes, there is no place in reality for any other substance. The substance is only one and the same. And the next crucial proposition affirms the necessary existence of God, and Spinoza introduced his own ontological argument. And this argument is derived from a proposition according to which existence pertains to the nature of substance and must pertain to the divine substance. And this is derived in turn from another proposition, the one which states the impossibility of one substance producing another, because such causation requires a community of nature that is impossible, granted that two substances cannot share their nature, and given the fact that there is only one substance, in fact. So, what is the underlying thought here? The underlying thought seems to be that any coherently conceivable substance, the possibly actualizable essence, must exist, since the conception of it cannot be derived from anything but its own existing self. And finally, since perfect substance exists and it possesses all attributes, and since there cannot be more than one substance possessing the same attribute, it follows that this perfect substance is the only substance, since there are no attributes left for any other substance. All ordinary finite things are modes of this one substance, that is, stand to it as, say, an emotion pertains to a person, or a movement to a moving thing. And thus the existence of a person consists in the one substance being in a certain state, just as the existence of my joy or anger consists in my being in a certain state. And some commentators, they resist the usual idea that for Spinoza God simply is the universe, insisting that he is rather the one substance in which all natural phenomena inhere. But though we should distinguish between the essence and attributes of God and his modes, that still leaves all natural phenomena as his states, just as my moods are mine. However, certainly God is not merely the physical universe for Spinoza. The physical world is God's body, God in his physical aspect rather than the totality of what God is. Humans, as it happens, only know one other of these attributes, namely thought, and God or the universe is thus both an infinite physical thing and an infinite thinking thing. The one substance and its most exhaustive things which are. What is the relation of this metaphysical theory to ethics? Spinoza claims that every finite thing has a built-in conatus, striving or endeavor to persist in its own being, that is, to keep its own essence actualized until it is defeated in so doing by external causes. And this produces self-preserving behavior suited to current circumstances. That is so to the extent that it can internally register these external circumstances, and the human mind-body is especially apt in such registration, which constitutes its own ideas of its current environment. Pleasure and pain are the mental analogies of an increase or decrease in the effectiveness of its conatus, differing in character with the thing's essence. And, in fact, Spinoza is a compromising determinist. Everything that happens is determined by two factors. The standing nature of God, that is, the laws of nature, and previous conditions, likewise determined back through infinite time. So the physical and mental behavior of a human being may be active or passive to various degrees. And the more it stems distinctively and creatively from its own conatus, the more active it is, and the more it is capable of preserving itself and persisting in its own being. The more it is merely acted on by external things, the more passive it is. The active behavior of the mind consists in what Spinoza calls adequate ideas, the passive behavior in inadequate ideas. And adequate ideas necessarily constitute more genuine knowledge. And among those ideas are the idea of God, which plays the prominent role. That is an essential element of our mental culture. Insofar we know God, we know the fundamental cause of everything, and our ability to preserve ourselves, our ability to increase the effectiveness of our conatus and to persist in our own being, greatly depends on our knowledge of the causes and on the knowledge of the ultimate cause, which is God. That is why intellectual love of God is the main motive for us as beings capable of exercising our abilities of knowledge and reason in order to increase the effectiveness of our conatus and to persist in our own being. And a few words about an alternative, a view, the one which was presented by another, a rationalist, Georg Wilhelm Leibniz, a German philosopher, mathematician, scientist, and polymath of the Age of Reason. His major work was monadology. And Leibniz introduced an alternative metaphysical theory that is a kind of ontological pluralist theory or substantial pluralist theory. The real world, according to Leibniz, is actually composed of eternal, non-material and mutually independent elements, and he called these elements monads. And the material world that we see and touch is actually just phenomena, or phenomena per fundatum. And he noticed that there was an apparent harmony prevailing among monads, and this prevailing harmony arises because of the will of God, the supreme monad, which provides the teleological organization of the universe. And it is God who arranged everything in the world in a deterministic manner, and there is a harmony between things and ideas pre-established by God. So Leibniz saw the principle of pre-established harmony as overcoming the problematic interaction between mind and matter arising in René Descartes' system. And Leibniz declared that we live in the best possible world simply because it was created and determined by a perfect God. So that was his theory. He claimed that the ultimate reality is constituted of the basic individuals, monads, eternal, unique, immaterial, soul-like, incomposable, non-interacting entities that have no windows through which to communicate with each other. And because monads don't exist in physical space, they are similar to the material mind or soul. And the overall organization of things depends on the teleology. So it reanimated and introduced some concepts that originally were developed by Aristotle in his metaphysics. And he adapted this metaphysical account of things to the modern European philosophy, and he was also the philosopher who introduced the idea of the possible world into the intellectual landscape of European thought. So I think that we have run out of time, yeah? Время, да, все у нас, да? Окей.